Hi, I'm Warren Craghead. I'm the co-curator of the show Impera e Divide here at 2nd Street Gallery. And along with my collaborator Pedro Mara, we put together a show of 6 international contemporary artists who are making comics. Pedro in his catalog essay talks about that comics are not images in series or cycles, but in sequence, in deliberate order. And that's definitely the case with these works. They also are all meant to be published in a final published form. A year and a half ago, Pedro contacted me. He was curating a show for the Amadora Comics Festival, which was just outside Lisbon, Portugal. And he wanted my work in the show, and I was happy to be in the show. They flew me out there, and I saw his show, which was originally called Divide e Impera. And I was blown away by the other artists in the show, how wonderful their work was, how their ideas of making work were so different from other artists that I'd seen, but also allied to my own way of thinking. So I worked with him to try to bring the show to a wider audience in the States and to 2nd Street Gallery here. The most important end result of these pieces, the real piece itself, is the printed piece, the books that come out of it. And we have a bunch of books to look at, a bunch of books for sale, some of which you'll never find in the US again. The first artist we'll talk about is Frédéric Cochet, and he's from Belgium. And this is his work. He draws all of these works as etching plates using aqua tint and dry point, etc. Prints them, then scans those and puts those into books. He also works from a lot of historical sources, from medieval and Renaissance paintings, which he draws pieces, chunks of, puts them together to create narratives that themselves are sometimes retellings of classical literature. The next artist is Ilan Manouche, and he's from Greece. He draws in pencil, and his work definitely has that destabilized, decentered, non-linear way of putting images together in a sequence that works, I think, the way some contemporary poetry works, where the lines themselves, read as a whole, don't necessarily make linear sense like a story would, but that end up making a whole that feels real and alive and that has its own experience. The work is less read than experienced. What I find most fascinating about him, and it relates to my own work as well, is that idea of putting images together in a way where there becomes a friction between them that isn't necessarily an addition, it's more of a sort of a non-cinematic way of putting comics together. The next artist is Fabio Zimbres, and he's from Brazil. He's had such a long and varied and really great career. The color in this is actually pieces of paper that are cut in and collaged and chopped through. And so even though it's very cartoony, it has a sort of choppy drawing style. It's also meticulously crafted, which is a hallmark of Fabio's work. This piece is a chapter from a book that he did with a rock band. Basically, there was a Brazilian band that recorded some songs, gave them to Fabio, and he drew a chapter of a book for each song, gave those back to them, and then they wrote words and they recorded the album. And then it's packaged together as a book with a CD. So each song corresponds to one chapter of the book. This chapter is kind of an homage to the American cartoonist Jack Kirby. The next artist is Andrei Molotiu, and he is an artist living in the United States. He was born in Romania. He's an art historian and an artist. As an art historian, he recently curated a show on Fragonard at the Getty Museum in LA. And as an artist, he makes abstract comics. His work starts out from various places, whether it's a photograph or from just him drawing, which then is digitally manipulated, taken back out and drawn. All of these pieces are some of the original chunks, and these are all hand-drawn ink pieces. One of the things about his work that I found so intriguing is that it is so far out there. It's much farther from conventional comics than anything else on this show. It's not about, you know, the little blue dot moving closer to the red line and then back again. It's much more about a relationship between the panels, both next to each other and all around themselves, and the page itself. The next artist is André Lemos, and he's from Portugal. André's work is a much sort of rougher and very cartoony work. This piece, for example, he said, started out as he just drew the first page and then kind of just went with it and didn't know where he was going to end up. That idea of sort of just following along wherever you end up, to me, is a great strategy for figuring out things that you didn't know were even there. It's hard to tell, but the writing in here is on Mylar plastic. That's because the piece was published in a Finnish anthology. André is also interesting because he runs a a book publishing venture called Opportuna Books, and where he publishes small press books, maybe 50 at a time, that sometimes have things like sewing on the cover or stapling or stamping, various ways of making special books that he puts out there. Our last artist is Erin Lee. She's from South Korea. Her work is heavily influenced by manga, which is a Japanese comics. I heard someone at the opening talk about her work. Oh my gosh, it's Gothic manga. And I think that kind of fits sort of what she's doing. All of it is digitally made, so these really are the originals. She sent us digital files and I output them in my studio. And you can see how she brings together both the hand-drawn and the digital media together in a way that they're integrated and almost seamless, rather than things seem slapped on top of each other. She uses the same characters over and over. She uses images interchangeably and repeatedly to sort of heighten that sense both of dislocation but also of identification. The last thing I'll talk about is the books themselves. Like I said earlier, the final process of all this work, it's nice to see this work on the walls, but it's really, these are just like sketches for the final piece. And the final piece is the printed work itself. The last thing I'll say is a quote from Pedro's catalog essay. He says that it's a wide, wild, and slowly awakening world. And I think that's a great way to describe it. Thanks.